Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach. And up next, we finish our marathon discussion, this time on how to prepare and train successfully. After that, World of Running updates on Diamond League Championships, Fifth Ave Mile, and more. Don't forget, end of month episode every month is a Q&A with your questions. And all you need to do to get a question on the end of month episode is go to AtoZrunning.com/question and share with us a thought about running, training, what's going on in your running and training, or other things related to that stuff. And we'll answer it on air end of the month. AtoZrunning.com/question.
We love those episodes, especially Zach does. They're his favorite, and we love connecting with you. That's part of the reason why. We like to interact, and we like to talk about running because we're all running nerds. That's why we're here. That's why we're listening. Zachary commented on Instagram on our last episode. One tip I learned from pros is to have an A goal, B goal, and C goal for any race I enter. You can have different versions of success this way. And I love that he commented that because he kind of brought some things together. When we were discussing last week on a successful marathon execution, we include all those different kinds of goals under the overarching definition for success as far as performance success within that. So whether or not you're having your A, B, C, D race day, you can still find success. And that's a really exciting thing.
Speaking of ways to find success, if you're looking for a race opportunity in the near future and you're somewhere around West Michigan at the time of listening to this, the Lake Michigan Credit Union Bridge Run, there's a 5K and a 10-mile race, is September 18th.
Coming up.
Very soon.
Very
on when
soon.
You're hearing this, it might already have been passed, but the goal for these kinds of things is to find fun race opportunities that can be fast, that can be fun, that can be an enjoyable experience on the whole. And this one is all of them. So do it up.
Speaking of fun, let's talk about training.
Well, you recall last week we were speaking about running a successful marathon race. What was the word that we used? Execution. Destroying the marathon.
Don't let the marathon destroy you.
Okay. Well, as it were, some would probably wonder why it is that we were talking about the race itself before talking about preparing and training for the race. That was, in fact, deliberate, or at least in retrospect, it was deliberate. There's always a good reason for these kinds of things. Start with the end in mind is the most important thing when we're planning our running goals and training and all of that. And so I need to know in my head what it is that it looks like when it's successful. And that's for a marathon training season, that's the end race. And so then what we do now is we kind of go backwards and say, okay, well, now that we know, because you listened to last week's episode, and if you didn't, go back and listen to it.
You have to do it right now, though.
Let's talk about then how to get there. So remember our marathon definition of success. This is really for any racing, any competing. If your goal is to try to compete as well as you physiologically possibly can. Okay, so if that's the goal, and remember the comment from the listener that there's lots of different goals. We might have tiers of goals, but the fundamental point that most of us are pursuing in running is to try to see how well we can do it. And of course, most of us want to enjoy that process as well. And some want to enjoy it without really caring as much about the performance, and that's okay too. But the point is, in order to do that, we have to then aspire toward, in a race, getting the most possible out of ourselves on that given day. And so that's the success. That's the goal. Now, to prepare for that, we then have to consider, okay, so in training, how do I then prepare well for that goal to execute that successfully? And of course, because I am a big fan of ironic comments and answers, much like my definition of success for the race day, definition of success for training is to be as ready as possible.
Yeah.
Great, right? I've solved all your problems
simple,
now.
yeah.
You never once thought of that, did you? That your goal in training is to be as ready as possible. Ultimately, we could say be as fit as possible is kind of another way of looking at that, among the other things involved. But there's more to it. And that's why we have an entire episode on it. So first, what does that look like to actually be as ready as possible? We're going to explore that a bit. But part of it is building as much fitness as you can within a given period of time. So if you're starting right now and you've got a race in 14 weeks, you have 14 weeks to grow as much of your physiological capacity as you can. And then, of course, in order to do this, you have to also be remembering what it is you're going to compete in at the end. So for a marathon, you have to be able to do two things at once. You have to be able to handle the distance. Like I got to cover 26 miles, and that in training, I have to do things that help me do that. And then I also have to be able to handle the sustained effort for the distance. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to just run as easy as possible, just finish the marathon, the only thing you have to worry about then, which is kind of convenient, the only thing you have to worry about is just being able to cover the distance. So you have a one part kind of training focus then, which is not bad. It's nice when we can be very focused in training.
And it's a difficult thing to do.
I'm not saying that's easy.
It's no small
I'm just
thing.
saying it's less to think about. Mm-hmm. But most of us are not just trying to cover the distance. We're trying to do it as fast as we can. So you have to be able to handle that sustained effort for the distance as well as just cover the distance. And so this means, ultimately, your goal, see, here's now where I get to the clear definition. Your goal in training or preparing for a marathon is to be both strong and resilient and efficient and economical, which are kind of redundant things to say, but redundancy.
But those are two
helps.
very important things that are going to be made up of some different training considerations.
Indeed, they are. And that's where we get to then what those considerations might be. And I love this kind of stuff because now we talk about, okay, so what truly do we do when we're training? Like what's happening and how is that preparing us for a thing? But now we're isolating the marathon specifically. And what is it that is most important in terms of training and preparation in those areas? To be strong and resilient, to be efficient and economical, what do we do to grow and develop those aspects? So then we have to break it apart. We have to say, okay, what are those things? Mm-hmm. One is musculoskeletal. So like your structure and whether it can handle things.
That's your bones, your ligaments, your muscles, all needing to be strong enough to support the distance of 26.2 miles and the training.
Right on. And then you have your aerobic system or energy systems, or, so there's a couple different energy systems, but we're predominantly focused on the aerobic. We're also going to lump into that your cardiovascular capacity because that's a piece of that puzzle. And I'm sure science people out there are going to say, you can't include aerobic and cardiovascular in the same system because they're separate things, which they are, but they involve each other.
Yeah.
And that's the extent of the way I'm going to try to explain that. And then there's neuromuscular. And this is the piece of the puzzle that is most often misunderstood and is rarely neglected, but it's not always addressed the most effectively.
Yeah,
so people do neuromuscular stuff, but they don't do it as well as they probably could.
Or realize that the goal of it is neuromuscular and not energy systems.
Here we go. This is so good.
Here we go.
Okay, first, I just want to mention that the marathon prioritizes your musculoskeletal development more than other race distances because 26 miles is hard to do structurally. Like, you're going to break down if you can't handle that much just running for that long. And so we have to keep that in mind here. But we would also then argue that even though that is true and all marathoners understand that in the sense of like you have to cover a long distance, it still seems to be an area that is underdeveloped in most people's training, which is really strange, is it not? Because the most important thing for a marathon is that first you have to be able to cover the distance well, and yet we don't train very well to do so.
I think it's because we are a little impatient.
Impatient
I'm just going to, maybe from personal experience and personal desires, I like to move on to the things that make me feel like I'm getting faster. And sometimes when you're working on musculoskeletal, it requires you to slow down.
This is true. And by the way, yes, I am wearing a hat. Not at all related to what we're talking about right now. So then on thinking about how we're underestimating the influence of some of these different parts and pieces, one of the other things that's curious about that, so the musculoskeletal is rarely developed well enough, and then also we seem to misunderstand the influence of things on our aerobic system as well as the influence of our aerobic system on running in general and some of those other things. So we're going to try to kind of break down a couple of those in bits and pieces. Starting with the musculoskeletal system. Okay, Andy, how do we train to best develop our musculoskeletal system. And what do we mean? Remember that we're talking about structure now. So I'm not concerned with energy systems yet when I talk about developing musculoskeletal, just the bones, muscles, tendons, tissues that you were
when you begin
saying.
training, to just focus on some time on feet at a very low effort so that you're able to do more load in order to build up that resilience and strengthen your bones, muscles, ligaments, and tendons.
Yeah, so that load is the key delineator there. And so in this sense, it's important to kind of like do phases of things, because there are better and worse ways to build that resilience in the system. A good example is running hard and long at the same time when you're not used to it is very bad for your system. Like you're gonna break more than you're gonna build up.
And that's why we strongly advise against fast finishes for most people, not always, but fast finish workouts and whatnot, because you're breaking down that musculoskeletal system when you're going at a high effort, and then you are at risk for injury, but also further depletion in your systems that won't allow for you to recover as well to continue on in your training, which is going to help you be consistent. You hear every single pro say consistency is what has helped them achieve their greatest success. You can't be consistent if you are driving yourself into the ground.
More on that soon. So keep in mind when we're talking about trying to develop musculoskeletal stuff for all runners, doesn't matter if you are highly experienced or you're brand new to the sport, everyone should start a new season or a new, like if you're coming from a break or coming from an injury or something like that, start that period with just some focus on rebuilding musculoskeletal resilience a little bit. Now, for those who are less experienced runners or new to the sport completely, you should spend a little bit more time on this. For those who are, just running season after season and you just have small breaks here and there, you don't need quite as much. If you're coming off a major injury or something like a surgery, like Andy, then you would spend even more time because that resilience piece is key. So I'm caveating again, but what Andy said is exactly what we have to think about. The first priority is building up the load, because that's what's going to help then establish that resilience and that musculoskeletal strength. So we need to do that simply with lots of long, easy running, like very easy running. And so many people ask, why do you spend so much time doing very easy running? And of course, the answer here is because it makes your structure stronger so that when you're running harder, you can adapt better from it. Like more training benefit from the harder running when you're structurally stronger. Let that sink in a moment. We're talking about training efficiently, like making good choices here. Okay, so you get the point. But then there's a lot of nuance around exactly how long do I spend doing that. I already mentioned that if you're a new runner or an experienced runner, there may be more and less time, but also like the nature of how things are going. So we'll come to that in a moment. But
can I give a brief illustration? I just thought of it. So I believe that musculoskeletal work in the beginning of your season is kind of like putting yeast in the dough if you're going to bake bread.
Okay, I've never baked bread or yeast.
So yeast allows for your bread to rise. If you are impatient, it doesn't rise as high. So if you would like to gain better fitness throughout your season, I would say musculoskeletal is a lot like the yeast. It takes some patience. It takes a little bit of time that you might not want to spend because it doesn't feel quite like you're making the progress that the other stages do, but that allows for you to rise.
Okay. I like that. I'm not very familiar with yeast and dough, so the analogy, I'm like trying to understand the baking concept first.
So
I do
now
like bread.
You do like bread.
Yeah. Well, no, I know how yeast works in dough, though. I took a science class at some point in high school. So yes, thank you. This is a good analogy. I'm being tongue in cheek. It was in fact a great analogy. So now, in thinking then about this concept, what we have to remember is that we're talking about running a marathon. And so if I can't handle that distance well, the rest of what I'm doing in training is mostly worthless. So that's why we prioritize this so high in this instance of it really doesn't matter anything else you do as long as you can get in strong loads of training first. If you can't do that, the rest of what you're doing is mostly wasting time.
Well, and it also often preludes injuries, because you don't have the strength to sustain your training. So no one likes to be injured. If we put it in very practical, frank terms, you don't want to get injured. You don't want the efforts that you're giving. And a lot of you are really good at giving great efforts and pushing yourself. But sometimes it's not done in a way that's going to help you see the fruition of your hard work. And that's why we're having this episode.
Yeah, and so in that sense too, you remember that the number one reason why people get hurt is not because they're running too much, it's because they're running too hard or too hard too often or too hard too soon or So we have to always keep that in mind. Now, there's a concept here behind like how long can you work to develop a system to like maximize it. And for the musculoskeletal system, you're never going to fully maximize its development like throughout your entire life. It's always going to be developing until it stops and starts breaking down. And so as a consequence, you have an infinite amount of time to work on this, which means whatever the amount of time between now and when you're training, that's when you start. And that's when you start building this thing up. Then what there is a question of, okay, so when am I ready to like do more than just long, slow, easy running? And that's an important question to answer here because as it were, you don't want to just spend your entire training season running long, slow, easy stuff. Even though I just said that, that basically would get you there.
Do you want to?
You don't want to.
I mean, some of us really like the long, slow, easy stuff.
That may well be.
Wanting in terms of our goals and defining success.
Yes. So this is very effective for the first phase, but it's only the first phase. And so how do you know when you're ready to move on to like, I can start adding in some harder efforts. I can start making some changes. And the first thing is you need to get your total load that you're running. And we use weeks to measure load because that simply is just the iterative, what's that concept for? That's the variable that we tend to use to repeat iterations in training. And so whether you train on a 7-day week or not is not the point. But within a 7-day period of time, there's a good calculus here. And it was, in fact, Arthur Lydiard who was the first one to, you could say, prove out the most effective amount of running in a single week that runners should reiterate.
Professional runners, though, right?
No. He tested this across, like, he was working with so many different people, testing so many different things, and testing on himself first. And anyway, so this was like before Lydiard became famous, when he was first started trying to figure this one out.
Okay.
And what he found was if we're going to use distance, depending on the runner, that's going to be different. And so we use time first, because time is true for everyone, is largely the same. And it's about 12 hours, okay? About 10 to 12 hours.
That's a lot.
I know. But that's the point, is maximizing, right? So for almost all runners, this is not true for every single person, for all ages. It's not true for all phases and stages of life and things. But in general, the rule of thumb is 10 to 12 hours of training a week is kind of like the maximum desired sustainable load.
Maximum. Okay.
Yeah, but you want to get to the maximum because that's the most effective load to help prepare and train your systems. Okay?
So a lot of you are all going to be like, oh my goodness, that is so much time. Well, it is.
But it doesn't have to be, because you only have as much time as you have available to train. The question is simply, if you start with the assumption that 10 to 12 hours is like the maximum goal, then you look at my schedule and how much training time do I have in a day and how much training time do I have in a week, because there's rules that we apply. Like, I don't want you to run more than 2 hours every day. As a matter of fact, some days it would be better for you to run an hour to an hour and a half, and other days an hour and a half to 2 hours, and not the same thing every day. So you're really just looking at how many days do I have in a week that I can train, and how do I maximize as close to that 10 to 12 hours as is prudent here. And so then once you get to that calculus, I know what my total volume is going to be when it's at its highest. Then you say, how long does it take for me to get to that volume of just easy running before it feels easy or manageable to do that in a given week? So it might take, for a runner, it might take 3 or 4 weeks of just slowly building up until you get there. For some, it might take a week or 2 because you're just coming off of a short break in a season. You can get right back into the load easily. For others, it might take 2 or 3 months because you're new to the sport, because you're trying to build up to something you haven't done before, and all of those things. So the point is, you have to do this musculoskeletal focus long enough so that you can build safely to your maximum sustainable load that you're going to do.
Which is different for everyone.
But the kind of the benchmark we use as a frame of reference is the 10 to 12 hours a week. And if we're using distance, depending on how fast you're running or not, it may amount to somewhere close to 100 miles a week. It may be like 70 miles a week, so it's not, or even 60. It's not the same for every runner in terms of distance, because you're running different paces. But 10 to 12 hours. Okay, so we've got that established. So then we just have to go backwards from there and say, okay, how long is it going to take me to get there? And this is the key. because you never build. So if I'm running this week, I never increase my load next week until this week feels manageable. Right on. We said the same word. You never know when we're going to do something like that. All right. So, and that's exactly it. It has to be manageable this week before next week can be more, because there's no logical sense in building up my training next week when I was barely able or wasn't even able to handle this week. So if you're cutting runs short because you're fatiguing too soon, if you're finding that you're sore 2 or 3 days after a run, then what you do this week is you just repeat it again, or even cut back slightly. If it's way too much and you just couldn't handle it, cut back slightly, and then repeat the week until you can handle it, no problem, and then you increase a little bit. Repeat that week until you can handle it, no problem. This is why I said for some it might be 2 weeks, for others it might be 8 weeks.
And that's why we talk a lot on the AtoZrunning podcast how you can adapt to thrive. And if we are serving a schedule that is not serving us back, then it's not going to work to grow your highest fitness, which is the goal as we've defined in this episode. So if you're following a plan, doing a little DIY of your training, and you're just following the training no matter how you feel, then you're likely not going to find your greatest adaptations and your greatest growth until you're able to figure out what is the correct path for you. You know, like if I need to repeat this week, being okay and knowing that you're not failing if you don't move on to the next week or the next phase of your training. So if you are running so that you are perfectly following a plan, no matter how you feel, you are doing it wrong.
Likely. Right.
No matter how you feel, that's the key piece there is
right.
No matter how you feel.
Yep.
So if you're just, if I feel really crappy, but I'm going to do what's on the plan anyway, no matter what, and I'm going to be perfect about following my plan, that's not, that you're doing it wrong. It's not correct training for your systems.
And we understand that comes across as like, well, that's harsh, or could be construed that way. And of course, you're right, it could be. But the point is it is an absolute truth that if you are training in a way on one day that is contrary to how you feel, like you're pushing yourself in ways that you shouldn't be based on how you feel, you are doing a detriment to yourself in some capacity. So we have to wrestle with that before we can really truly grasp how we're going to train.
But it can be the most liberating and amazing thing about being an adult runner is realizing that this is all... You don't have to
listen to your coach?
Well, no, or talk to your coach about it. It's supposed to be an ever-changing thing based on your needs and how you're adapting.
Right on. So let's kind of wrap up the musculoskeletal side of it with just remembering, so in that sense, during this time, effort is irrelevant until we get to the point where we can sustain our maximum target load. We should be doing this long before, like there's this mindset with marathoning where it's like you take 12 weeks to build up and then you're ready for the race. And it's like, man, if you took 12 weeks to build up, you're just ready to start training for the race. Let me say that again. Once you finish building up, you're ready to start training for the marathon. And if you've been doing that the way I just described all this time, let me tell you, you have better marathons in your future simply by understanding the concept that we're explaining right here. So you start your marathon training when you've finally built up your load and your volume to that maximum sustainable load. Okay, now that's when you get to then add in dynamic efforts. And that's when things get to be a little bit more interesting day to day. You're not just running easy all the time. You're not just jogging a lot. And then all you have to do to apply the simple concept here, when we're talking about musculoskeletal development and different types of efforts, there's really just one key principle, which is that you do, in a given day, you do enough effort and or distance to achieve the adaptations, but never so much that you can't do it again tomorrow. And that is another imperative here, because we're talking about your musculoskeletal development, and to build strength, we need to be training every day, or very nearly every day. I mean, obviously not everyone's running 7 days a week. Most people aren't doing that. And many are running 4 or 5 days a week. So however many days you're running, you need to be able to do it again soon. And so in that sense, you're running, if you're going long enough that you can, make sure it's easy enough for the longer run that you can feel good again in a day or two. And if you're running a harder effort, you need to make sure that you don't go so long at that hard effort or so hard at that shorter effort so that you can't do it again or feel good again in a day or two.
And for those of you who are starting back, as we have mentioned as a possibility from an injury or like a surgery from me, we need to do every other day in order to be
Oh, yeah.
on this path, right? So when Zach says every day, well, I'm not arrived yet, but it's going to take a while for me to get there where I'm able to even run every day or multiple days in a row. So as you're listening, just realize that there's a lot of nuance with coming back from injury or beginner runners, which we hope that welcome. If you're a beginner runner, we're so glad you're here. So that is another reason or variable that could make it so it's not every single day at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So what you're doing during this period of time is you're not focused on like marathon workouts. People always have these mindsets of like, certain marathon workouts. You're not focused on that kind of thing. You're just focused on doing harder effort things for an adaptable period of time. And so it can't be too long. And after you've done that long enough, and we'll establish what that means in the next system in a moment, but after you've done that long enough, then the final step for a marathon is it is valuable, it's not imperative, but it is valuable to do harder effort, longer runs. And I'm not saying your long run becomes like a tempo run every week, although it might, depending on what exactly is going on here and how well prepared you are at that moment.
Or your
But
schedule.
the point is, because a marathon is 26 miles, once you can handle running for long periods of time, easy, the final step is, can you run for long periods of time at harder efforts? Not straining yourself to the max every single time, but just an increased effort for longer periods. And so that's the final step that in terms of just strength and resilience, you need to be able to do that to really best maximize your marathon potential. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of ways to go about that in terms of training and preparation. We're going to include some of that in the next section. But the key is you do incorporate, and you don't just do like one or two. If you have time, you do like a few weeks of some longer hard effort runs. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now the next system is then, as mentioned, your energy system and the aerobic side of it specifically. And like once again, we're lumping cardio in with that. And so in this instance here for a marathon, this is of course quite important because you have to be able to supply energy to your muscles well beyond a normal or reasonable degree of energy in a small period of time.
You are intentionally introducing a stress that allows you to adapt.
Yes. And so that's exactly the principle of it. So for the training, the system, it's simply this, is you're trying to teach your energy system to have to supply energy at different degrees of effort. There's a piece of that that's valuable, but most importantly, over long periods of time. So once again, the long is the key for preparing for the marathon because you have to cover the distance before you can do anything else. And so your body has to be able to supply energy to your muscles for long periods of time. And then after you've established well that that's possible, then you have the opportunity to ensure as well that it can supply energy to your muscles at higher efforts. Because once again, we're assuming you're trying to run a marathon as hard as you are able to do as well. So then you have two things going at once. Can it supply for long periods of time? Can it supply at harder efforts? So what do you do then to make that possible? And so the first and the most important key here is we're working on the aerobic energy system. So you have to understand in principle, how does the aerobic energy system function and when does it not function? So like the degree of effort where it stops becoming aerobic and starts becoming anaerobic, as well as what are the kinds of things that are developing in terms of like the aerobic system. Because you can be within your aerobic system from, when you're just sitting doing nothing, all the way up until like a reasonably hard effort for a fairly long period of time. And so what you have to be able to do is maximize benefits within all of these ranges of efforts. So long, easy runs are an imperative for musculoskeletal development, which we mentioned, but they're also the most valuable way to develop your aerobic energy system as well. So even though hard effort stuff is a positive contribution to your aerobic system, it's not as effective as the long stuff. So we have to be focused when we're doing our longer runs of keeping the effort easy enough that we can do those more often and that we can do them and recover faster from them so we can do the other things as well.
You guys love time efficiency and things being efficient, right?
Oh, yeah.
So if you know that being able to recover and repair quickly enough to return on another effort and that you're going to increase your aerobic capacity, that makes it a lot more appealing to run with less effort, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Now, the funny thing here, and I don't know if it was Lydiard specifically who said this or just others have commented over the years, but if we could, based off of this concept, we probably should just run long runs every day. right? But we can't.
We can't.
It's too hard on the system. So we don't. And so as a consequence, that's where the changes in efforts comes into play. The primary reason during a conditioning period of time where we're really just working on conditioning our energy system, the primary reason we do harder efforts is because it offsets the longer efforts. So we focus on the longer stuff. And we're talking about 1, 2, 3 longer runs in a week, depending on the runner. And so basically it's like as many as you can handle safely. For most runners, that's 2. For some, it's 3. And I wouldn't probably go more than that.
For me, it was more like 2.
Yep. And so then what you do is you say, okay, if I'm going to do 2 longer runs in a week that are like 2 or more hours, maybe one of them isn't quite 2 hours, it's like an hour or 45 or something, but I'm going to try to get 2 longer runs in a week. Then the other runs are a combination of things. And the first combination is a little bit harder effort for, again, a sustained period of time. Remember, we're talking about trying to train our aerobic energy system. Okay.
We call that steady.
Yes, without saying too much, and certainly not trying to. There are plenty of great running programs out there and coaches out there that use interval training to great effect. And I understand that. I know that is true, and I know that there are a lot of studies that have proven those things out. But interval training is still less effective and less efficient at developing your aerobic energy system than just long, steady running. Okay, so your interval workouts are good, but they're not as good
for the
as
marathon
that time
runner.
Spent could be, especially for the marathon runner. And there's a time and a place for interval training for other distances that's very important. For the marathon, it's minimally important, if at all. We'll talk about the other one.
Exactly.
Yes. There's a piece. So then what we look at is, okay, so sustained harder effort runs. Now you have to get back to like how the training adaptation, right? You do it long enough that you can get a training adaptation, and not so long that you have to take 2 or 3 days easy afterward. And so for most runners, that's around an hour. It could be shorter. I wouldn't go much longer. Even if you're a pro, I would still tell you to just, to keep your steady runs to an hour for now. Because what we're trying to do is we're just trying to really get high quality runs every day. And so sometimes they're long, sometimes they're harder. That's basically it. So then what we're doing here is, for the aerobic energy system, is we're just taxing it every single day in a slightly different way, basically every other. And in order to do so, we have to be able to sustain that high load and that consistency as long as possible until we've essentially maximized your aerobic energy system development, which I will explain in a moment. We're going to come back to that.
But
how
can
do you know
can you max out your
No,
aerobic
but
development?
there's an interesting caveat to that. Yeah.
But I do want to mention this because I just find it to be such an exciting thing about training, is that there is no limit to your aerobic ceiling. So we can all be really excited that we can continue to grow in the sport.
Indeed. Until our bodies can't handle it anymore.
That's true.
Yes,
yeah, I
there's-
guess we
there's a
are
period-
limited.
There's a
as
period
humans,
of time where we start
but-
declining, yes.
But Eliud Kipchoge would say no human is limited.
Well,
Maybe he was talking about
that's because
aerobic
he
capacity.
hasn't yet hit an age where his decline has begun. We'll see how he changes. I'm kidding. Okay, so neuromuscular system is our final in terms of these key system developments. And this one's really the most simple and the least important for the marathon.
Well,
it is the least important of the
I'm
3.
going to argue.
No, it is the least important of those 3.
For completing the distance, but I would say that it is imperative to be alongside these in order to run correctly and not get injured.
Well,
and to be efficient enough and be able to utilize all of that great fitness. You need to be able to run properly and not get hurt.
That is true, but keep in mind that the primary vehicle for keeping you healthy is the musculoskeletal strength and resilience. So if you're not doing things that are aggressive, you're less likely to have problems. Anyway, so here we get to argue on air, which is always fun for us. But Andy's right. It is important. It is in terms of time spent, it's going to be your least priority. You're going to spend the least amount of your time and effort on neuromuscular development.
But the other side of that coin is it doesn't take as long to develop your neuromuscular system.
Which is why you don't have to spend as much time.
It's key, but it doesn't require as much attention.
Yep. Okay, so neuromuscular is, of course, then the relationship between mind and muscle, hence neuromuscular, and it has everything to do with your movements, developing things like autonomic movements, the things that happen when you're not having to consciously think about them, developing, or rather increasing your muscle recruitment and your maximum voluntary contraction, which is like, how hard can you squeeze a muscle, essentially? And so all of those things are part of neuromuscular development. And what we have to consider then is, what influence does that have on the marathon specifically, for the sake of our conversation here, distance running in general, it's the same influence. But what we're talking about is your efficiency, as Andy mentioned, your running economy, and your mechanical soundness. So how you're moving is important, because the better you move, the more efficiently you move, the less energy you're using. And so you can cover that ground more healthily, certainly, as Andy's saying, but also like you can actually do so at a higher effort with lower cost, which is great.
Got to share the maybe bi-yearly quotation of Dave Hodgkinson: run better without trying harder.
Run faster without trying harder.
Oh,
yeah. Because
I'm going to quote him wrong.
Yeah.
Both, though. That's, I mean, essentially that's synonymous, right? Because if we're going to run better, we're going to feel better, and we'll run faster without trying harder, which is a great goal to have, isn't it?
Indeed. So there's two ways as an athlete that you fundamentally can develop the system. One is certain types of things you do in running, in your workouts, and another is certain types of things you do outside of your running workouts, which is where things like the strength and precision, coordination, stability training,
running drills,
come into play. Yep, the running drills and all of that.
Lunge matrix.
Think about it like this. If you could spend 5 minutes a day doing something that could guarantee some measurable amount of improvement on your end result goal, wouldn't you do so? Now, let me give you a study from 2018 that suggests that and it's actually not 5. Okay, so you always do that, right? You start with a little thing, and then you just increase it a touch because it sounds more manageable. Anyway, so this study from 2018 was isolating already well-trained endurance athletes who were training. They were doing a 5K time trial in this instance. And what they did, which is not terribly relevant, by the way, to the end result, the marathon, you'll see the benefit. So they took these athletes for 9 weeks, okay? Only 9 weeks. They did a simple kind of strength and plyometric training program, which was not terribly elaborative. So like 20 to 30 minutes maybe in a day. And it wasn't every day either. And then they measured their 5K time trial at the beginning and at the end and had them plugged into all the machines. And here's what they found. In this instance, 3% improvement of efficiency. So their energy cost is 3% lower, essentially, I guess is maybe that's not exactly how that works. But anyway, 3% improvement in efficiency and a reduction or an improvement in VO2 max, which basically is suggesting you can run at a higher effort aerobically for a longer period of time without risking an anaerobic change. So as a consequence, simply doing these 9 weeks of a strength and plyometric program. And why? Because it's a neuromuscular influence. And so they're improving muscle recruitment. They're improving their autonomic function. If they're doing functional movement exercises, it's even better, and all of that kind of stuff, right? So when you as a runner think about, why would I do a little bit of extra 10 or 15 minutes a day on some of this like strength and precision and coordination drills? Well, it's because it's going to make you better.
It will.
And it may not make you 3%
and feel better.
It's not a guarantee that's going to make you 3% better, but it's going to make you better, period.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it also helps with things like preventing injury and things like that.
It's a good warm-up.
It's right, but it makes you a better runner.
It does.
You're faster. So do that.
Yes. And I'm going to do something on Instagram. I'm going to do maybe even a challenge on Instagram for just doing the lunge matrix and some leg swings, and have that be your one small routine to go into fall, to go into better running. And I want to encourage everyone to just start doing that one thing, because I know it can be overwhelming because you see a million things to do. I know you do, because I do. When I see it on Instagram, I'm following all these different people that have great suggestions, and it's all great stuff. But a lot of us get overwhelmed and we don't know where to start. And this is where we suggest that runners start with the lunge matrix and leg swings before you run.
And that's where we got the 5 minutes from in my original fraudulent claim.
So I will be sure to post that. I'll also link to it in this episode so you can get started right away. And for our athletes who are listening that have heard us say this before, but sometimes it's not super consistent, this is your encouragement today to make it more consistent. Do the lunge matrix and those leg swings before your run every single day. Now, and even when you don't run, actually.
Yes. Now, good point. Yes. Even if you don't run, that's still good stuff to do. we were suggesting there's a way you do this also in training, in your workouts. And this is where you get the question, where many people will say, I was doing all these weeks of jogging. I did what you said, Zach. I did all those weeks of jogging to build up the musculoskeletal development. And now I just feel super lethargic and flat. Like I can't even hardly, like it's just hard to get going. And the answer is yes, because you are lethargic and flat. I mean, because, well, anyway, yes, that is in fact what happened to you. And it was deliberate. Because your neuromuscular development has in fact decreased during that time. And we just don't care because it's easy to get it back. So yes, I understand that I did that to you when I recommended that, but you aren't training for 10 weeks for a marathon. You're training for 18 weeks or something, right? So you have the time to get it back. So I'm not worried about it. However, if you need to fend that off more during times like that, the drills and those types of exercise routines do help. Mm-hmm. And then also it's not counterproductive in a musculoskeletal building phase to do some occasional like short, quick stride out things here and there once in a while. That is an okay thing to do. You just have to be careful because it's easy to hurt yourself doing really fast, short stuff as a distance runner, especially. So just let it be comfortable if you're going to do it.
And also we do recommend what Mike Swinger brought to us, those zombie drills. And we've mentioned it, but I realize that some of you, it's been so long since we had him on the show that you might not remember what zombie drills are. So I'll make sure that I link to that in this episode, and I'll be posting.
A ton of work for yourself.
I know, but I'm excited about this. I think it's important because this is a 0 time cost for you to be a more
Zombie
efficient
drills.
runner because it happens within your run. You can do this while you are running on your easy run. So I highly recommend it. Mike Swinger does a fabulous job explaining it in his YouTube channel. So I'll make sure that I have that resource for you, but I'll also post about it on Instagram to help remind you. But it's been incredible for me. I've been doing them since I first learned of them from Mike Swinger on a regular basis. And I think it's really helped me in my return to running, both on the Boost, which is a reduced gravity treadmill, as well as getting to run outside now. I'll do the zombie drills and it really helps me engage better.
So in terms of then when you're in the training block and you're able to devote a little bit more attention to an actual workout that helps with the neuromuscular side, that's where we get into the conversation about things like some higher effort, like interval and repeat types of things. They have some increased value in this capacity. And so it is understandable when people want to be doing some interval workouts, especially late in a training cycle, when they're like, I'm feeling kind of flat and I want to get a little bit more sharp. That's understandable. But there is an easier way and a little bit safer way in terms of like not having the risk of overdoing it in training and having to take extra days to recover. So remember how we're describing you're doing maybe 2 or 3 long, easy runs in a week. Maybe you're doing 2 steady, shorter runs that are like an hour or so. There's one other workout you would do during this mix. And this is Lydiard's like his
bread and butter,
perfect conditioning formula is this mix we're talking about. And that other workout is some kind of repeat type of thing. Best if done not structured, but an unstructured way. And that's where the fartlek comes into play. You've heard us talk about that plenty. But the fartlek is itself intended to be, more than anything else, a neuromuscular workout. You're not worried about whether you're taxing your system enough for a significant training adaptation. You're not doing some kind of like intervals to exhaustion kind of thing. You're just simply trying to get a high quality neuromuscular experience. Because if you can do that regularly, like once a week is plenty, then you're going to stay in touch and continue to develop those things well enough that it's not going to be a problem.
And if you're still unclear about fartleks, Zach has written a pretty extensive article. And so
quite extensive.
I will link to that.
I needed to write.
I'll link to that as well as an episode that we did about fartleks if it's easier for you to listen on the go. But it's important to understand exactly what he means by fartleks because it's used in quite a different variety of different ways in different people's training programs. So just wanted to make sure that I identify that so you can look back on that info.
Good thoughts. So then what it comes down to is there's one kind of final time when you're getting close to your goal race, like a couple of weeks is plenty. That's a great time to start scaling back your total load. This is, everyone talks about tapering. 2 weeks of tapering is always plenty, by the way. Some do more, and I guess it can be helpful.
And it depends on how you're
times.
feeling, because
Depends on how you're feeling.
If you're not feeling great, you want to feel great. 2 weeks.
In fact, that's true.
Yeah.
And so the key here is you're already scaling back your total loads, and you're also scaling back your sustained amount of intensities. And so that's a great time to just kind of sharpen the edges a bit. And so some more short, quick interval type of stuff helps kind of sharpen your neuromuscular development just a little bit more. And it does not take long. That's why we're talking about like just 2 weeks. 2 weeks of some quick stuff can help you dramatically in terms of just that development. So yes, good.
And remember, when you're within training, as Zach was mentioning before, if you're not feeling the zippiness yet, just remember and trust your training that it is coming, that you're developing and you're being productive in developing your systems and your musculoskeletal. And I think a lot of runners get anxious and concerned because they're not sharp yet, but you will be when you hit this stage.
If you do the right kind of sharpening workouts.
But I did want to mention that because I do
interval
think
workouts are not.
I did want to mention this because of the discouragement that I often hear from athletes and have experienced myself, where you start doubting, like, am I going to be able to do what I want to do in this race? And so your reward coming into the race is being able to put all those pieces together and see it all come together beautifully for you. So I just want to encourage all of you right now. A lot of you are in fall marathon training, and sometimes you're starting to feel a little mundane maybe, or you're in the thick of it, and it's hard to imagine coming out on the other side running stronger than ever. And so this is a time to remember your success and your goals, and that's going to be based on how well you do this whole training cycle.
Okay, enough encouragement, inspiration stuff. Nobody needs that. But what you do need to know, and how we kind of wrap up this time, is how do you know you are fully prepared for the marathon? And this is, in fact, the question that is the least answered. I think
I agree.
Least answered well, especially. In training in general. Like, no one actually tries to answer that. They'll say things like, once you've done your 20 miler or your 22 miler, then you're ready. Or once you've, finished the cycle, do my training plan, and then you're ready. But we can actually answer that question better. And it's very easy to do so.
Zach, you're making a big claim here.
Yeah, because the answer is simple. You're never fully prepared. Ha! I'm kidding.
I was like,
Wasn't
what?
that funny? That was so mean. No, but actually that is partly true, because as Andy said, you're always building things. Your systems do not stop developing until your body can no longer develop and you're starting to decline. And so as a consequence, your musculoskeletal and aerobic systems are just always going to develop. There's a caveat there with your anaerobic system. Does not have infinite development capacity by itself, because it only ever exists as a percent potential of your aerobic system. But anyway, you're always developing. So we know that. We get that. So we have to then understand, okay, there's kind of like a cyclical approach here. How am I done or prepared within this current season?
Yes.
And this is where the interesting comment we were alluding to earlier, there's a practical limit to the degree of adaptations you're likely to make in a single season. And that is really fascinating, because you don't hear people talking about this. Like, you can literally see in your training progression, and you can see if you measure athletes over time, that you kind of hit a point where it's like, and there I clearly stopped improving any significant amount and just kind of plateaued a bit. Not totally, because you'll continue some amount of improvement if you do the same
especially
thing
with
for
the
year upon
neuromuscular
year.
stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, just with all of it.
Yeah.
However, there's a practical limit, and this is what's so fascinating. So when does the practical limit happen? The first thing is it's probably going to be within 12 to 18 weeks. So if you're looking at a 24-week training cycle where you're like going to try to do this crazy hill phase for 10 weeks and you're going to try to like all this kind of stuff, you're going to spend more time plateaued than you need to for that training cycle. So we always look at a season and say 12 to 18 weeks that's a full season in most instances.
Unless you're starting with all the musculoskeletal stuff.
Yeah, if you need to start from zero. If you need to start from zero, then yeah. So the way I would calculate it is 14 weeks is a full season of training. All the rest of building and growing musculoskeletal development happens before the 14 weeks.
Preludes.
14 weeks is what you need. But if you're new to the sport or inexperienced or new to a marathon, you might need more than 14. So that's why I say it could be like a little longer. But the point is, so that's about the amount of time it takes. But then how do you, like, when you're doing it, how do you know what it is? And the key here is there's two. One, running high loads effortlessly. Like, you go out for your long runs, your easy long runs, and it's just no problem. I can run 2.5 hours every weekend, and it just feels like kind of par for the course. It's not going to feel that way every single time you do it, because there's too many other things going on. Like, if you're not
variables.
Yeah, if you didn't get enough sleep, if you're not hydrated well enough, if it's a super hot day, if you're running on crazy hills or flat, all that kind of stuff.
Or with a friend that's pushing you too fast.
Nobody does that. So, yes, in general, though, when you go out to run 2.5 hours and all of the variables are relatively normal and the conditions are reasonable, and it's just kind of like, oh, that's a piece of cake. I can do that. That's great. So that's
at an easy effort.
That's example number 1 that says you are ready in terms of that aspect. And then 2, and this is the second phase then, is then when you're also able to run stable in harder efforts over longer distances. So an hour is good, but that's not proof positive yet. If you can run harder efforts over 2 hours, like a steady run for 2 hours, and you're stable for the entire time, you're not in the hole and you're not taking days and days to recover, then that's the second piece. You don't ever do that until you can do the first piece. You can run long and easy, and it's no problem. Then you can run long and steady, and you can do so in a stable effort. It's never going to feel great when you do things like that, but you can do so in a stable effort. When that is true, both pieces of the puzzle are true, then I would say to you, you are ready for a marathon.
Boom.
All right. Now,
you wanted like applause, but I don't have any sound effects.
Oh, no, I mean, that was definitely like the wow.
Nice job.
My head got like 3 sizes too big right there. Okay. So just keep in mind then, you've got to budget this well, because you're looking at, I want to have the best possible marathon. You want to have, the right amount of time for it, 12 to 18 weeks, probably better to have 14 to 18 weeks.
Not including your musculoskeletal work beforehand to make you prepared for your season.
That's the truth. And then you just have to make sure that you can be as consistent as possible during that time, because any of the small disruptions, they slightly sway. So a good example of that is a couple of days off here or there in a series of conditioning training weeks. Probably means you're going to need an extra week or 2 of conditioning, but you usually don't have. Suddenly you just make up another week or 2 extra. So you just do what you can with what time you have, which probably brings us to what we're going to talk about next week.
I was just going to say, next week, stay tuned. Please subscribe. We're going to be talking about disruptions in training, and you'll get more advice on what to do when those things come your way that disrupt your training.
All right. Now that you know everything you need to know about preparing for a marathon, let's talk about the world of running. Okay, first up, we've got some A to Z runner updates. Congrats to Brandon for a marathon PR.
Woo!
And the double Boston qualifier. So those of you who were not aware, the Boston window for 2024 opened on September 1st, 2022, and the 2023 window closed on September 16th, 2022.
Perfect.
Which means for 16 days you could qualify for 2 years of Boston. And Brandon did it.
Yeah.
Nice work, Brandon.
Perfect timing.
That's awesome.
Nice work.
Yeah. Craig ran a marathon, marking his 14th state in which he's run a marathon.
Craig, that's so impressive.
Very impressive. Nice work, Craig. Christy ran the Mountain Bald Head Challenge, and Daniel ran a marathon debut.
That's huge.
And in describing it, said, I was feeling pretty good in the late stages, but I had to take a pit stop at mile 22, and it was hard to get the rhythm back. And it's like, oh, man.
And he ran great, so it's really exciting. And his wife race walked it, so she was a former teammate of mine, so I want to make sure I shout out Katie, too.
About the degree of
That's amazing. I'm so impressed. And then shout out to previous podcast guest, Dr. Todd Buckingham, for winning his first half Ironman, the 70.3 Ironman here in Michigan. And I mean, to win your very first one, Ironman was sharing about him too, so it's a really cool thing. And it's not a surprise because
to anyone that he can do that. He's that good.
Todd is a world competitive triathlete. He just hasn't done this distance yet, so it was exciting to see him rock star such an awesome debut. He's been on the show multiple times, and with this conversation today, if you want to know more about the science of building fitness and your aerobic capacity and how that grows, cellular and just overall view, you'll want to check out that episode. It's one of our most popular. So congrats to Dr. Todd.
Well done. Well, let's hear about the Great North Half Marathon, one of the kind of pinnacle half marathons in the world.
Very, very briefly, Jacob Cablimo won the race by over a minute, and I wanted to give him a shout out. Under an hour, which is always exciting to see. 59:33
over like world class runners.
Yep, over 10,000 meter Olympic champion Solomon Barega. He ran 60:39. So you can see there's quite a distance in between them. And Kenenisa Bekele, he was showing some great pre-marathon fitness with a third place finish of 61:01. And on the women's side, it was a much closer battle. So that was pretty spread out on the men's side. But on the women's side, it was close. Helen O'Beary was the victor on the women's side in a time of 67:05 over Olympic marathon champion Perez Chepchirchir. And they battled until O'Beary outran Chepchirchir by only 2 seconds. So 2 seconds in a half marathon is really tight, but they weren't alone because third place was Elmez Alyana, and she ran 67:10. So there's only a few seconds between them. In an interview with Athletics Weekly, Helen O'Beary revealed that she just wants to get to the starting line healthy for her first marathon, and the goal is to do well and to finish well. They were definitely searching for more big goals from Helen O'Beary because we're all holding our breath, figuratively, about her debut as a marathon runner because she's had such strong road running in this last summer season. So it will be exciting to see what Helen O'Beary can do in the marathon this fall.
Right on. We're excited about that. I can't remember which Masters she's doing. New York?
Oh, goodness. Now you're I should have written it. I'm sorry, guys. I should have written it. I knew at one time, but I don't remember at the moment.
Also, in New York City, it is New York City, right? Yep. The Fifth Avenue Mile, which is not a mile, it's a 1,600-meter
which
run.
We were perplexed about at first.
Which was a little confusing to me. Yeah. You cannot call a race a mile if it's not a mile. That's terrible.
But
anyway,
there's like no sources like actually defining that. Everything's just like the Fifth Avenue Mile, and not saying that it's a 1,600. But it would make your jaw drop because the times were so fast.
You gotta add a couple of seconds to make it an actual mile. Yeah.
So commanding the win for the women was Laura Muir.
Just crushed them.
So the way that it happens here at the Fifth Avenue Mile is that there is a halfway bonus.
Mm-hmm. And if you also finish within a certain amount of time.
Right.
So you can't just like jog after the halfway.
No. So there's like a certain time you have to dip under. And Laura Muir surged for the halfway bonus, but then held it. There was no backing off from Laura Muir, and she was looking so uncomfortable. In the end, she would tell everyone that it was super painful, but she drove to the line an extremely fast time of 4:15, beating the course record previously held by Jenny Simpson. So Laura Muir, major props. Yeah, she was blazing fast, and it was wet. So it was not ideal situation, like not ideal circumstances for her to run this fast. Nikki Hiltz, 4:17. Eleanor Fulton of the USA also in 4:18. And Gemma Reekie was ran fourth place. And the reason why I want to mention her is because people were kind of talking about her as maybe the favorite coming in.
I don't know why I didn't say that. Laura Muir was in the race.
I don't know.
Gemma Reekie never beats Laura Muir. Anyway, okay. Hands up. On the men's side, also an exciting race because you had world champion 1,500-meter runner Jake Whiteman running and a whole slew of world-class athletes coming like 2 days off of Diamond League championships, jumping across the pond to race this race. And so quite exciting.
Yeah.
Now, I should note, because it happened in the women's and the men's races, it was wet. It was rainy.
Yeah.
And two different runners seem to forget that when it's wet, it's slippery.
But it was the first step.
And so their foot is on that plastic thing. That's like got your timing thing. Anyway, I don't know what it is, but that little plastic thing, you have to run over it. They call it a mat. But
timing mat.
Their foot was on it. And I'm like, don't put your foot on it. It's plastic. And it's raining. You're going to just slip. And of course they did. Yeah, they slipped.
Yeah.
First up. Anyway, that aside.
That was Josh Kerr who fell down. Yeah.
He literally fell down on his hands and had to get back up.
Unfortunate for him.
Bummer.
Yeah, so the winner was Jake Whiteman in a time of 3:50. This is coming off 48 hours after his race in Zurich, which we'll mention later on. We'll cover that event, but it was a huge turnaround. I mean, a small turnaround, not huge, but a huge accomplishment to be able to do such a successful turnaround. And this is his third time winning. And I wanted to, just a quick little fun side note, Nick Willis is the 5-time champion of this event. So it'll be interesting if Jake Whiteman wants to go for that overall championship record.
No way.
Jake Hayward in a time of 3:50, so is really close on the men's side. Sam Prakel of the USA in 3:51. He got the halfway bonus.
Yep. So in this instance, you didn't have like in the women's side, they weren't really trying to get the halfway bonus. When Sam Prakel got it, was it Sam Prakel or Sam Parsons?
Oh, shoot. I
Well,
think it was
anyway,
Parsons.
someone named Sam got it.
I think it was Parsons.
I don't think it
I'm
was Sam
sorry.
Pringle.
That was. You're right. I was totally wrong about that.
When he got it, he just like took off slightly before the halfway and was like looking around, like, is anyone gonna challenge this? And no one tried to go.
And then he
with
like
him.
celebrated.
Yeah, he like did a little celebration, and then he finished. I don't know how far
It was
back, but he still got
hilarious.
the bonus because he ran fast enough. So good stuff.
So Zurich, which is the Diamond League final. It is the very end of the Diamond League series. You have to be invited to participate in this event
Based off your performance
based on
in
your
the Diamond
performance,
League.
yep,
so
throughout the
this
series.
is you're only going to this race if you've been running well in the Diamond League meets throughout the rest of the
That's
summer.
why they call it the championship, and they give out bigger prizes. On the women's side, in the 800-meter run, Mary Moore of Kenya was the victor over a couple people who were mentioned continuously throughout. But she won. I want to give her moment. She took the lead after the rabbit dropped, and she held on to claim her victory. Second was Natoya Gould of Jamaica, who's been running really well as well. And then Sage Herda finishing out a strong, well, she ended up running Fifth Avenue Mile too, but closing her Diamond League track season just super strong. She claimed the third place spot and yet another sub 2, which previous to this season, she had never run sub 2, and she's run it multiple times throughout the summer. So really exciting to see Sage Herda coming on so strong.
Of the USA
and
On
and they were all
Athletics
saying, it was saying who was the favorite for this one? For the
Keely Hodgkinson.
Keely Hodgkinson was the favorite, and they
Except
kept
that
talking
Mary
about.
Mora keeps beating
I know,
Keely. So
and people are like, "Oh, it's such an upset." And I'm like, "Well,
No.
it's really not an upset if Mary has beat her even within this season for the Commonwealth Games, right?" And she,
if not other times too.
Yeah, well, there was a Diamond League early on, and then I think the
Yeah,
Commonwealth
yeah.
Games she also beat her. So it wasn't an upset in my opinion. It was just strong athletes running against each other. You didn't know who was going to
The
win.
upset was how far back Keely
That's
Hodgkinson
true.
was. She was like fifth or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's towards the end of the season, and sometimes there are athletes that come on strong, and then some that are just that clearly their body needs a rest. So, yep. And I have linked to that race for you to watch, and then the men's 1500 meter run.
Women's 1500 first.
Oh, women's 1500. Thank you. You don't want me to skip saying Faith Kipyegon's
Well, you don't want to
name.
skip saying.
I don't want to. She's one of my favorite athletes. She won her third Diamond League championship.
Wow, she just wins everything. She literally
She's been
wins
winning
everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's just a brief, there's not really a lot to talk about within the race because it was the Faith Kipyegon show.
Well, it was slow, which is
Well, it
interesting.
went out slow, and everyone let Faith Kipyegon control the race. They did have an excellent pacer who was doing her duties, Allie Wilson of the USA. She's one of our really great 800-meter runners right now. She took it out and the pace that they asked for, but no one went with her. They all stayed behind Faith Kipyegon and let Faith control it the way she wanted the race to go down. So
it's just weird to me because it's like, first of all,
She
don't
can
let her control the race.
Exactly, because she can outkick
she'll
everybody.
do the race she wants, and she's going to win it anyway.
Yeah.
So just, anyway, all right.
Yeah.
I concede.
I linked that race if you want to see it as well. Men's 1500 meter run, Zach.
Yeah, on the men's side. So we got this one you can watch too, which is always exciting. No surprise here that the race did exactly what it always does this year. Jakob Ingebrigtsen in the race. Timothy Chariot of Kenya in the race. So these guys have
I've
been
only
racing
said
each
his
other a
name
ton.
like 500 million times.
Stewie McSwain in the race. So we're just a lot of exciting things. A dearth of American 1500 meter runners lately, which is always a
there
bummer.
was
But
none.
yeah, well, that's because they're not any good.
That's
But-
not true, Zach. Oh my goodness, there was a couple. It was a rough year for a few of them.
Yeah, that's true.
Injury-wise.
So, yes. So as you can guess, anytime Jakob is in the race and Timothy Chariot is in the race together, the same thing happens every single time, which is
a fast race.
yeah, Jakob likes it fast. We already know that. Timothy Chariot likes it fast also, but he doesn't want to be the one setting that tone.
He likes to try to run tactically, and it's
right
worked
behind Jakob.
It's worked for him, and not just Jakob. Like
Yeah.
I feel like that's
Stewie
how we've
or-
seen him race historically, even before Jakob Ingebrigtsen was running the 1500 meter. Like Timothy Chariot likes to run tactically if he can, but he's been having to run fast with Jakob.
Which is not a problem. He can handle it.
Lead foot.
Yeah.
Jakob.
Yeah, so there was a rabbit, but that didn't really make much of a difference because it went the way it was going to go either way. But what ends up happening here, and I should mention Ali Hoare in the race too, because he's the one who likes to sit back a little bit and just drive the kick, see if he can catch him. So it happened the way you would predict. Jakob went right behind the pacer. Timothy Chariot right behind him. Stewie McSwain was right with him. Abel Kipsang of Kenya was there too. He's been racing well in the diamond circuit. And so late in the race, Jakob takes over when the pacer drops and just continues the pressure, just keeps kind of slowly
Gradual.
ramping it up. And this is the way he likes to run. So everyone just kind of strung out behind him. And it was like, hopefully he doesn't have it like he did in the World Champs, and someone can go by him, but they couldn't.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
Jakob Ingebrigtsen comes across in a new world leading time,
Yes, fastest of the year.
329.02 or something. And so, naturally it was going to be fast. And then Timothy Chariot was like close behind, and who ended up third?
Oliver Hoare.
Oliver
He
Hoare
battled. He
ended
was,
up
like,
third
fit-
because he's coming flying down.
Exactly.
It's
He's done this
crazy.
a few times
Yeah.
where he's like in 5th or 6th. I wouldn't count. I don't know exactly, but he's like 5th or 6th, and he doesn't look like he's in it for a podium spot, and then he charges. He's a really great finishing kick.
Yes, he does.
Yes. So he ended up claiming the 3rd place spot for this Diamond League Championship final.
That's great.
Men's 1,500 meter run.
Men's 5,000 meter run.
What did I say?
We just did the 1,500.
Oh wow.
Well,
Need
on
more
the
coffee.
men's 5,000 and for the women's too. We're not obviously talking about every single event here. Otherwise, we'd be here all
There are
night.
a lot of great
But-
events, guys.
A lot of great events. But we did want to mention this one in particular because, you'll find out in a moment. But for the 5,000s, this is the second year now where they've done this with the Diamond League final, where they built a temporary track outside, and it's like around
The Opera House.
Yeah, it's around the Opera House, and so it's like a 563 meter track or something.
It's
random.
banked. There's hills.
It's 3 lanes, so it's super narrow, and the crowd is like right next to it on both sides. So it's like a
Yeah.
tunnel of people, which I guess that part of it kind of is cool,
Yeah.
except it's awful.
It should be its
is-
own event, like
Well-
its own separate event, not like the Diamond League final, because
Yeah.
it's like a different type
Right.
of running.
And here's the rule of thumb. For a championship race, you don't want like a unique experience. Because the championship race, you want it to be a
This is
familiar
totally Zach and
experience.
Andy's opinions about stuff.
No, but this is how, in terms of the way a championship thing goes, you don't want people to be doing, it's like how people used to talk about with the Final Four in NCAA basketball, where it's like they're playing in this giant warehouse with no ceiling, and it's weird because you can't tell the depth of the basketball hoop anymore, so people are missing shots they never miss, right? Same thing here. You don't race a championship race on a track that's just by
it's
itself
like a road
totally
race.
unique
It's
track.
like a
Yeah. Anyway.
loop road race is what it ends up looking like.
It does look like that. Well, it was exciting.
It was.
Because USA's Grant Fisher was in the race, which he's been having a bang out summer.
Yeah.
Which has just
How
been
many American
exciting.
records? 4.
Yeah, his year has been incredible. And then of course we've got all the favorites, which is always a lot of fun, and including last year's champion Al-Ragawi, and all the fast kickers, and so it's like who's gonna lead it, who's gonna want to kick. So Al-Ragawi wanted it fast, which you always know because that's the way he likes to run. He's kind of from the front, but it didn't pay off this year because those other guys just stayed with him until they were ready to pass
Used him as a pacer.
It was tough. But what it ends up being is it was Kenya's Nicholas Kipkorir who had the best kick in a 12:59 5,000, and then in second, South Sudan's, who's also been having a great year, Dominic Lobalu, who has been just this coming out of kind of like nowhere this year, not out of nowhere, but definitely a massive improvement this year. And so a second place finish, which is great, and then in third, USA's Grant Fisher,
Yeah, Grant.
for a Diamond League Championship
show up.
podium.
Fantastic.
Well done, Grant Fisher. And his kick was strong. I would wager he would have had a better finish. Maybe second, maybe first. First would have been tough because Kipkorir was really gunning down the straight. But he would have had a better finish, at least closer, if not for the fact that he was stuck behind these two other guys. He was trying to find a way around them.
Twinkle toes.
Grant, this has been happening all summer. You got to stop getting stuck behind people when it comes time for the kick because your kick is really good.
He's got a great
All
kick.
right.
Yeah, it's exciting, and Grant Fisher did an amazing job. More on World of Running coming to you next week. Again, we're going to be discussing disruptions in training, which many of you have had questions about. So,
You're speaking of questions.
speaking of
What
questions,
a great transition because you've got questions, we've got answers. Or at least we'll pretend
We'll
to.
find them. No, don't say that. You discredit. No, we love your questions because if you're asking the question, it's very likely that other people are also asking a similar type of question. Now, we always do want it in context because that will change the answer. So please
All the
give
details.
us your questions in context.
AtoZrunning.com/question. And of course, if you've got more needs than just a question here or there, we may be able to help you out there too. And just look for the word coaching. AtoZrunning.com, look for the word coaching.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.